They thought they were untouchable. They thought silence would protect them, but silence only works when no one is watching, and now everyone is watching because something has cracked deep. Inside the image they built around themselves, something has shifted, and it started with just a whisper online, a comment here, key, clip there, a creator speaking out, then another, and before long it turned into a wave, a growing storm that even their most powerful connections could not contain. Blake Lively's team, once known for polish and perfection, suddenly found themselves surrounded by questions that refused to go away no matter how carefully they tried to bury them. And what happened next was not part of the plan, because this wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't supposed to reach the public like this, and yet here it was, playing out for all to see, live and raw and unfiltered. And while they scrambled to regain control, the internet did what it always does. It remembered it, shared it, archived it, and above all, it demanded answers, because the moment one creator dared to speak, the moment one story broke the seal, the floodgates opened, and it became impossible to hold everything back anymore. For years they operated with quiet confidence. Their name meant safety, their press team meant silence, but now those very tactics were under the spotlight, being examined, questioned, pulled apart in ways they never prepared for. And at the center of it all was a court case that would not stay in the courtroom, a case that was never just about legal arguments. It was about trust, perception, influence, and what happens when a well-crafted image starts to unravel in real time. Justin Baldoni may have been the face on the other side of the legal fight, but this story reached far beyond him. It became a rallying cry for those who had felt the quiet power of Hollywood silence for too long. Creators, small and large, started talking, not in outrage, not in hate, but in clarity, in truth, in courage. They began pulling receipts, making timelines, comparing statements, and when the discrepancies started showing up, when the patterns began forming, it became harder and harder for the team behind Blake to explain it all away. And with every new post, every new document, every new detail, the foundation began to shake, because this wasn't just about one case or one mistake. This was about something deeper, something cultural, something that had gone unchallenged for far too long. And now the challenge had arrived, bold and undeniable, and growing louder by the hour. So if you think you know the story, you may want to hold on tight, because what's coming next is not a takedown, it's not a smear, it's a revelation of how control collapses when the truth starts speaking louder than reputation. They said this moment would never come. They said the lawsuits would drag on for years. They said no one would ever hold them accountable, but here we are, and now the silence from Blake Lively's team is deafening. The same team that once stood tall behind the scenes with glossy press statements and carefully curated media narratives is now scrambling, running for cover as legal filings paint a picture they never wanted the public to see. The timeline was quiet at first, just small whispers from insiders, anonymous posts hinting at chaos. Then came the digital trail. The emails, the meetings, the internal documents that revealed just how far this team went to control perception, to suppress creators, and to manage the fallout from a scandal that grew far too big to contain. But even then, the world hesitated, still unsure if what we were witnessing was real. And then it happened. Court orders were issued, subpoenas were delivered, and the veil was lifted for good. What we now know is more disturbing than anyone expected, because this wasn't just about legal disputes or creative disagreements. This was a calculated pattern of behavior that targeted voices that challenged their image, a strategic push to shape public narrative at the expense of dozens of creators who found themselves suddenly entangled in a web of fear, silence, and manipulation. And as these details came to light, the team, once so confident, began to fracture. Meetings were missed, spokespeople went quiet, and suddenly no one seemed to have answers. Publicists, once eager to respond to every rumor, began redirecting questions or vanishing altogether. And in that silence came confirmation, not just of wrongdoing, but of a full-scale unraveling of a reputation so carefully built. The lawsuit had always been about more than just damages. It was about truth. And now that truth was burning through every carefully constructed layer of their defense. The irony is painful. Blake Lively, known for grace and control, now caught in a storm created not by her words, but by the silence of those around her, the silence that allowed these actions to persist, the silence that prioritized brand over ethics, and in this moment, that silence is screaming louder than any statement ever could because the creators they tried to silence are speaking louder than ever. And the public is finally listening. One creator after another stepped forward, each with their own story of intimidation, sudden demonetization, and back-channel pressure, each one different, but eerily similar in tone and timing, each one shedding light on a pattern of behavior that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. This wasn't just a PR misstep, it was a sustained effort to weaponize influence against those who refused to play along, and now as legal documents continue to unseal and deposition dates loom, the weight of those choices is settling in. The carefully managed media blitz is over, and what remains is a legal battlefield where charm means nothing and receipts mean everything. Sources close to the situation reveal internal conflict has erupted within the team. Some advisors are pushing for a full public apology, others fear the blowback would be worse than the silence, but indecision is proving costly. The narrative is slipping away, and for the first time, it is being shaped not by them, but by the very people they tried to silence. And while Blake herself has not issued a direct statement, her absence only intensifies the speculation, and for many, it feels like a turning point. The moment the machine that once seemed invincible began to crack from within, and now creators, journalists, and viewers alike are demanding accountability, not revenge, not hatred, but clarity, transparency, and above all, honesty, because the damage goes far beyond headlines. It lives in the careers disrupted, the mental health toll, the fear that settled in content spaces that were meant to be creative, free, and collaborative. And as this story continues to unfold, one thing is clear: the old rules no longer apply, and no matter how powerful the PR machine once was, it cannot undo what the evidence has already shown. And so begins the real reckoning, where truth is not just spoken, but demanded, where creators once dismissed now hold the microphone, and where silence is no longer protection, but proof that something went terribly wrong. As the dust settles from the first wave of revelations, the second hits harder, not with headlines, but with whispers from inside sources. Court reporters, former assistants, people who were once part of the machine, now anonymously coming forward, painting a fuller picture of what really happened behind those perfectly lit Zoom calls and red carpet photos. And what they're saying is chilling. It wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding, it was systemic, orchestrated, a long-running campaign to influence not just public perception, but platforms. To creators with growing audiences started noticing something off: subtle changes in algorithm behavior, sponsorships that mysteriously vanished after collaborations with certain voices, even monetization flags on content that hadn't broken a single rule. And when patterns like that repeat across dozens of unrelated channels, it's no longer just speculation. One veteran creator with nearly a decade in the game shared how they received a vague email from a brand they'd worked with for years, suddenly pulling out, citing pressure from unnamed PR concerns, and at the time they didn't connect it to anything specific until now. Now they realize it all began around the same time. Blake's legal team launched a quiet but aggressive wave of preemptive communication with advertisers and media contacts, trying to get ahead of a narrative that hadn't even fully formed yet, but was clearly seen as a threat. And while those efforts may have worked for a time, they left a trail, and that trail has become evidence now entered into court record by attorneys who've built an airtight case from fragments, stories, screenshots, leaked memos. And the moment those details became public, the tone shifted again, this time from quiet discomfort to outright panic inside the team once known for precision and control. Emails stopped getting answered, phones rang unanswered, insiders started ghosting each other, trust began to collapse. Because the one thing no one planned for was exposure. And as creators realized they weren't alone, that their experiences weren't isolated, a wave of solidarity began growing fast, not in anger, but in focus, with clarity and purpose. Because what they were fighting for wasn't just views or clout, it was their right to speak, to create, to exist online without fear of silent retaliation or whispered blacklists. And that's when the legal strategy shifted on Blake's side. The once bold posture started to falter, internal discussions shifted from offense to damage control, and key members of her representation reportedly began distancing themselves from decisions they had once proudly endorsed. Some even began submitting internal memos to the court to protect their own positions, documents that contradicted Dow's earlier statements and now sit at the heart of what analysts are calling a credibility crisis for the entire legal effort representing her, and with each passing day, more of those. Documents come to light showing how far things may have gone, the coordination with PR agencies, the timing of content, takedowns, the soft pressure on journalists, all of it now under scrutiny, and still no statement from Blake herself, just silence. A silence that's becoming its own headline every major entertainment outlet now covering the story not just as a legal spectacle, but as a moment of cultural reckoning. Because this is no longer about one celebrity or one lawsuit. It's about the balance of power in the digital age. It's about the invisible ways influence can be used not just to uplift, but to suppress, and as creators rise up armed with facts, not rage, but resilience, the message is becoming impossible to ignore. And while some fans still defend her clinging to the image built over decades, many others are stepping back, rethinking, reevaluating what they believed and whether the persona matches the pattern. And in Hollywood, where image is everything, that kind of reevaluation is fatal for brand deals, for roles, for longevity, and the irony is thick. The very tools once used to protect the image may now be the reason it unravels public relations. Insiders are calling this one of the worst managed spirals they've seen in years, not because of the original scandal, but because of the response, the silence, the arrogance, the hope that ignoring creators would make them go away. It didn't. And now those creators have become reporters, investigators, and advocates all in one, uniting around a common cause, and platforms are noticing to YouTube quietly updated guidelines around visibility, transparency, and brand engagement in direct response to the themes emerging from this case. And while they haven't named anyone, the timing is telling. Creators who once felt invisible now have the attention of platforms, lawyers, and most importantly, audiences. And for the team behind Blake, the options are shrinking fast: settle and admit fault, fight and risk more exposure, or disappear and let the headlines tell the story for them. And none of those choices come without cost, because the creators aren't backing down. Not this time, not after what they've been through, not after the receipts. And as part 3 looms and more court appearances draw near, insiders say even more documents are expected to go public. More deposition excerpts, more communication, records, and possibly witness statements from within her own camp that could turn everything on its head. And through it all, the energy online continues to swell, not in chaos, but in momentum. Not just for justice in this one case, but to set a precedent that voices matter, that silence can't be weaponized, and that no matter how famous or powerful someone is, they don't get to rewrite truth just because it's inconvenient. And so the silence from Blake and her team continues. But it no longer feels like confidence or composure. It feels like retreat, because they lost the narrative, they lost the control. And now, as the digital courtroom grows louder and more creators step into the light, what they're really losing is the belief that they can walk away from this untouched, because the internet remembers, and the receipts never lie. What no one saw coming was how quickly the walls would start closing in. Because just as Blake Lively's team thought they could control the narrative, silence, sing noise, and walk away untouched from all the behind-the-scenes chaos, something shifted, something undeniable, that not even the most carefully constructed public relations plan could shield them from. Because when creators from multiple platforms started sharing nearly identical experiences, when documents started aligning, timelines began matching, and whispers from insiders turned into recorded interviews, it stopped being a theory and started becoming a pattern. It's a kind of pattern that cannot be dismissed, not with denial, not with charm, and certainly not with more curated Instagram stories and red carpet smiles. Because this was different. This was momentum, building like a wave of quiet voices that suddenly found each other, rising in sync like thunder before a storm. And in that moment, it was no longer about Justin Baldone or a lawsuit or even the original drama. It became about accountability, about what happens when violence turns into intimidation, and those affected decide they won't stay quiet anymore, because they deserve to be heard, they deserve clarity, and they deserve justice. Now creators began coming forward, not with anger, not with hatred, but with proof. subtle proof things. Like emails sent just minutes before a post was taken down. Messages from managers hinting. At pressure from above, creators who had no ties to each other started posting videos saying the same things, that their content about the situation would suddenly disappear, that their analytics would plummet, that their comments would flood with strange patterns and vague threats, and while 1 or 2 people could be written off as coincidence, 10, 20, 50 could not. And so the public began watching closer, and not just watching, but connecting dots that had previously gone unnoticed. Suddenly, fans and followers were becoming investigators, scrolling back through old posts, saving screenshots, archiving deleted tweets, and in those archives they found discrepancies. They found reversals. They found praise turned to silence, collaboration turned to cold distance, and over time it painted a picture not of one mistake, but of a strategy. A consistent attempt to shift perception even when the facts were difficult to dispute, and as more content creators opened up, it became apparent that this was not only a Hollywood story, this was a digital story. A modern story of how fame and technology and storytelling collide. Because when someone with a global platform chooses to shift a narrative even subtly, it doesn't just affect headlines. It affects livelihoods, it affects mental health, it affects the very structure of trust online. And that realization became the heart of what was unfolding, because people were no longer just defending their favorite actor or their favorite influencer. They were confronting something deeper, the growing tension between power and truth, and suddenly, Blake Lively's team was not just managing a legal narrative. They were facing a cultural one, the kind that doesn't disappear with a Notes app apology or a PR team statement, and in the center of it all was the undeniable question. If there's nothing to hide, why so much effort to hide it? The question echoed louder with every passing week as more voices joined in and every attempt to refocus attention seemed to backfire. Each vague denial became an invitation for more evidence. Each legal silence felt like avoidance, and even those who once supported her began asking, why not address it clearly? Why not speak with transparency? Because the silence was no longer golden, it was heavy with implication, heavy with missed opportunity, and that weight was becoming too much for even Sefer, her most loyal supporters, to carry for her. Because transparency doesn't require perfection. It only requires honesty, and the more people looked, the more they realized how little of that was being offered. And then came the turning point, a sudden shift when one creator released a video, not speculating, not questioning, but showing time-stamped content messages before and after, and interactions with team members who didn't realize they were being recorded. And in that moment, the mood changed. It wasn't about gossip anymore, it was about facts. And those facts didn't align with the version being presented by the team around Blake Lively, and instead of responding with openness or clarity, the response was familiar: a sudden pause on press appearances, sudden reshuffling of brand partnerships, quiet untagging from collaborators. And followers noticed all of it. They saw the patterns, and this time they documented every move, and soon media outlets that had stayed neutral began investigating, reaching out to the creators, speaking on record. And when one major outlet published a piece outlining the timeline with links to supporting evidence, the floodgates opened. The story wasn't underground anymore, front page, and the timing couldn't have been worse, because just as the team was hoping, the court side of things would calm down, the public narrative reignited louder than before, and not from a place of revenge, but from a place of resolve. And that distinction mattered, because the people speaking up weren't doing so for clicks. They were doing so because they had felt pushed aside, unheard, dismissed, and now finally the story had space to breathe. And that was powerful. That was contagious, because in every online space, from Twitter to TikTok to Reddit, the conversation shifted from speculation to strategy, and the strategy being revealed was clear: slow rollouts of distractions, vague emotional posts, timed announcements to redirect the narrative. And yet none of it worked, because the public had already seen too much and trust, once cracked, is not easily repaired, especially when that crack is caused not by the original incident, but by how it's handled afterward, because people don't just remember what happened. They remember how you made them feel, and the feeling was not of honesty. It was of evasion, and so what began as a legal tangle involving creators and allegations had evolved into a cultural case. Study of how fame can attempt to rewrite reality and what happens when the people push back, when they say, "Not this time. Not like this, not in silence."